Her cousins ripped her dress at the ceremony, until the Lycan king covered her with his royal cloak. Nobles whispered behind fans and polished goblets, their laughter soft but sharp, like the glint of a hidden dagger. Tonight was the ceremony of unity, an event meant to celebrate alliances between noble families. It was a night of pride, display, and whispered rivalries. Lady Seraphine moved slowly through the hall, her gown trailing behind her like a whisper of moonlight. Her family had chosen the dress carefully, a pale silver fabric that caught the light and shimmered with each step. The embroidery glimmered with threads of gold, each stitch a testament to her family's wealth and status. Yet beneath the elegance, Seraphine felt a flutter of unease. She knew the jealousy in the eyes of her cousins, the quiet murmurs that trailed her like shadows. Seraphine tried to smile, one cousin whispered, her voice sweet but sharp. "Remember, you represent the family tonight." Seraphine forced a smile, nodding politely, but the words felt hollow. She knew that representation often meant sacrifice, and in this hall, appearances mattered more than truth. She walked toward the central dais where nobles had gathered, the flicker of torchlight casting long, dancing shadows. The ceremony began with the customary bowing and offering of greetings. Her heart pounded in rhythm with the hushed music, a stringed melody that echoed through the vaulted chamber. She held her head high, feeling the eyes of the entire court upon her, but she could not shake the sense of foreboding that hung over the room. And then it happened, a sudden tug at the fabric of her gown. She gasped as she felt the delicate silver material tear, first in a small rip along the hem, then spreading like a stain of darkness across her dress. Panic rose in her chest. Her cousins, those who had whispered earlier, exchanged secretive glances. "Seraphine," one of them murmured, a smirk hiding behind false concern. Before she could react, another harsh pull and the gown's bodice ripped, leaving her trembling and exposed. The room froze, whispers blooming into murmurs of scandal. Gasps rippled through the hall. Seraphine's cheeks burned with humiliation, every eye a weight pressing down on her. And then, a presence. From the shadowed corner of the hall where few dared to tread, a figure emerged. He moved with quiet authority, silent yet impossible to ignore. Tall, cloaked in dark velvet, his presence commanded attention not through noise but through sheer force. Silver eyes glinted in the dim light, sharp and intelligent, yet there was something otherworldly in them, something that seemed to see beyond the fabric and the surface. The nobles parted instinctively as he approached, a hush falling over the room. Without a word, the figure stepped to Seraphine's side. He lifted the corner of his cloak and, with a careful gesture, draped it over her torn gown. The rich, dark fabric swallowed the rips, covering her like a protective shadow. The heat of his proximity made her pulse quicken, and for a moment all else faded, the murmurs, the courtly eyes, the shame. This is impossible," her cousin whispered under her breath, a mixture of awe and fear in her tone. Seraphine looked up. The man's eyes met hers. There was no judgment there, only a quiet understanding, as if he recognized her not as a pawn of her family, but as a person who deserved protection. I don't," she started, but the words caught in her throat. He inclined his head slightly, the gesture deliberate, almost ceremonial. "You are safe," he said, his voice low, deep, resonant, carrying the weight of command. "Do not fear them." The hall remained silent, the courtiers unsure whether to speak or flee. The tension was thick, almost visible, like smoke curling in the torchlight. Seraphine's heart thudded in her chest, a mix of relief and something deeper she could not name. "Who are you?" she whispered, barely daring to breathe. "I am Kaelin," he replied simply, though the name seemed to echo in the chamber with an almost musical resonance. "King of the Shadows." The words sent a shiver through the room. A Lycan king, a creature of legend, feared and revered in equal measure. Tales spoke of him as a ruler of the forests beyond the mountains, a being both man and beast, cursed and immortal, bound by laws older than the kingdoms themselves. No mortal dared meet him without consequence. Yet here he was, standing beside her, offering protection instead of menace. The hall, now electric with whispered questions, seemed smaller, the chandeliers dimmer. Seraphine felt the cloak warm and heavy around her shoulders, not as a weight of shame, but as a shield. Her shame began to melt into curiosity, mingling with a strange sense of destiny. Why me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Kalen's gaze softened, though his eyes still held the sharpness of a predator. "Because you are not like the others," he said. "Because they do not see the truth that you carry within." The room held its breath as he turned, cloak still draped around her, and swept down the hall. The murmurs followed like wind through the trees, but no one dared stop him. For the first time, Seraphine felt the intoxicating mixture of fear and fascination. He was dangerous, yes, but there was safety in his power, an unspoken promise that for tonight at least she was untouchable. They stepped into the courtyard, where moonlight poured over stone fountains and statues that gleamed with silver in the night. The city beyond seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Kalen lowered the hood of his cloak, revealing sharp, angular features framed by dark hair that shimmered like midnight. "You," Seraphine began, struggling for words. Her voice faltered. "You didn't have to help me." "I did," he said simply, as if the reason were obvious. "Some protections are not requested, some actions are inevitable." The words, simple yet profound, sank into her. She realized then that she had glimpsed a world beyond courtly politics and family rivalries, a world governed not by appearances, but by strength, choice, and ancient rules that mortals could scarcely comprehend. They walked in silence through the gardens, the night alive with the scent of blooming night flowers and the sound of leaves rustling in a gentle wind. Seraphine felt the cloak still around her shoulders, heavy yet comforting, a barrier between her and the cruel world she had known all her life. Her mind raced with questions. Who was this man really? Why did he care? And what did it mean that the Lycan king had noticed her among all the nobles and all the scheming eyes in the court? As they reached a marble bench beneath a weeping willow, Kalen paused. He looked down at her, and in the moonlight the silver of his eyes seemed almost luminous, reflecting not only light but something older, memory, pain, and perhaps a longing she could not name. "Do you know," he asked softly, "how rare it is for a mortal to survive a court unscathed, to retain dignity and grace despite every attempt to destroy it?" Seraphine swallowed, her throat tight. I try," she whispered. Kalen's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Then you are stronger than most," he said, "and perhaps stronger than even you realize." The words lingered between them, heavy with meaning. For the first time, Seraphine felt seen, not as a noblewoman trapped by her birth, but as a person capable of courage, of choice, of survival. But the night was not yet over. The flickering torchlight in the distance warned that the ceremony's influence still stretched far beyond the courtyard. And though Kalen had saved her from humiliation, Seraphine could not ignore the whispered threats, the jealousy, and the danger that still clung to her like a shadow. "Will they come for me again?" she asked, almost fearfully. Kalen's gaze hardened, silver eyes glinting like steel in the moonlight. "Perhaps," he said, "but not tonight. Tonight you are mine to protect." The words, simple yet profound, sent a shiver through her. She understood in that instant that her life had changed forever. The Lycan king had entered her world, breaking through the fragile walls of courtly life, and in doing so had shifted the currents of fate. Seraphine felt a mixture of fear and fascination, knowing that this night, this moment under the moonlight would be remembered always. Not for the shame of her torn gown, but for the power, the mystery, and the undeniable presence of a king who was more than mortal, and a protector who had seen her true self when the world would not. And as the moon climbed higher, casting silver light over the courtyard, Seraphine realized that her life, once dictated by cruel cousins and hollow ceremony, now hung in the balance between fear, courage, and the strange, magnetic pull of the Lycan king. The moon hung low over the kingdom of Erendor, spilling silver, light across the world like a river of glass. Beyond the city walls, the forest stretched endlessly, its dark trees whispering secrets to the wind. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the shadows seemed alive, moving with a quiet intelligence that unsettled even the bravest traveler. Seraphine followed Kaelin silently. The cloak he had draped over her shoulders still smelled faintly of the forest and the warmth of his presence. Every step she took on the soft forest floor made her feel as if she were leaving the world of courtly rules, gossip, and rigid expectations behind. Here, in this moonlit wild, the rules were different. Here power and danger walked side by side, and Kaelin moved like a predator who knew every secret path, every hidden danger. "You must be careful," Kaelin said suddenly, his silver eyes catching the moonlight. "The forest protects me, but not all creatures you meet here are friendly." Seraphine shivered, though not from fear alone. His warning carried a weight she could not name, a promise that the forest was alive, watching, testing them. And yet she felt a strange comfort in walking beside him, knowing that he was aware of every sound, every movement, and that he would protect her. She wanted to speak, to break the silence that hung between them like a delicate web, but words failed her. Instead, she let her eyes roam, taking in the strange beauty of the forest. Trees towered like ancient guardians, their branches twisted and black against the silver sky. Small glimmers of light flickered among the leaves, fireflies perhaps, or some magic she could not understand. The forest seemed both alive and eternal, and in it, she felt small and yet strangely free. Why are you helping me?" she asked at last, her voice trembling just enough to reveal her uncertainty. "I don't even know you, and yet—" Kaelin's gaze softened slightly. "You are not like the others," he said again, as if repeating a lesson meant for both of them. "I have seen mortals rise and fall. Many do not survive the cruelty of their own kind. You," he paused, searching her face as though weighing her spirit. "You are different. You do not hide your fear, and yet you do not let it rule you." Seraphine felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. She wanted to tell him that she did not feel different, that fear clung to her as tightly as the cloak he had placed over her shoulders. But she found herself unable to speak. Instead, she walked quietly, feeling the pull of his words and the strange thrill of being seen. Truly seen. The forest opened into a clearing, the moon spilling light across a small pool of water that shimmered like liquid silver. Kaelin stopped at the edge, kneeling down to touch the surface. The water rippled under his fingers, but the reflection it held was not only of the moon. It also seemed to show something darker, deeper, like the memory of centuries past. "This is the heart of my forest," he said, rising and looking down at her. "Few mortals have ever stood here and returned unchanged." Seraphine swallowed. "Changed how?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked closer, his steps silent on the mossy ground. "The forest reveals truths," he said finally. "It shows who you are and sometimes who you could become." The weight of his words pressed on her chest. She had spent her life being told who she was supposed to be. A dutiful daughter, a careful lady of the court, a prize for her family's ambitions. But here, under the silver light and the watchful eyes of a king whose power surpassed anything she had known, she felt something stir, a part of herself that had been hidden beneath layers of expectation. Kaelin crouched beside the pool, his reflection sharp and haunting in the water. "Do you see this?" he asked. "Do you see yourself?" Seraphine leaned forward, staring into the water. For a moment she saw only herself. The pale silver gown, the cloak draped over her shoulders, her hair loose and shining under the moon. But slowly, the reflection shifted. She saw strength in her posture, determination in her eyes, a quiet courage she had not known she possessed. I don't understand," she whispered. "Understanding comes later," Kaelin said softly. "First comes recognition." He placed a hand near hers, though not touching her. The air between them seemed to hum. You are stronger than your fear and braver than you believe. That is why you are here with me in this forest. Fate has a way of finding those who are ready to see it. Seraphine's heart pounded. She wanted to believe him, wanted to feel the truth of his words, but a shadow of doubt lingered. "And if I fail?" she asked, her voice trembling. Kalen's gaze hardened, silver eyes flashing like lightning. "Then I will carry you through it. I do not abandon those I choose to protect." The sound of a distant howl broke the stillness of the night. It was long and mournful, echoing through the trees. Seraphine froze, her pulse quickening. "Do not fear," Kalen said immediately, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "That is a challenge. The forest does not allow weakness. They will test me, and through me they will test you." A rustling came from the shadows beyond the clearing. Seraphine's heart leapt into her throat. Shapes moved, figures gliding between the trees, their eyes glinting faintly in the moonlight. Kalen stepped in front of her, cloak spreading wide, shielding her from view. "Stay behind me," he ordered softly, his voice calm yet commanding. "Do not move." The shapes hesitated, sniffing the air, their low growls rolling through the forest like distant thunder. Kalen's posture shifted subtly, his body coiled with power, a predator ready to strike. Seraphine could feel the tension in the air, the raw energy of the forest responding to his presence. Minutes passed like hours. Then, slowly, the shapes retreated, vanishing into the darkness as silently as they had appeared. Kalen exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "You see," he said, turning to her, "strength is not only in the body. It is in knowing when to act and when to trust." Seraphine nodded, still trembling. I trust you," she said quietly, and even as the words left her lips she felt their weight, heavier than any promise she had ever made. Kalen studied her for a moment, a faint smile touching his lips. "Good," he said. "Trust is the first step. Everything else will follow." They sat together in silence, the forest alive with sound but feeling distant, almost sacred. Seraphine realized she was beginning to understand the kind of life Kalen had lived. Centuries of solitude, of battles both seen and unseen, of powers that could both protect and destroy. And yet, he had chosen to protect her, a mortal, vulnerable, and untested. "I don't know how to repay you," she admitted, looking down at her hands. "You do not repay," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Actions have consequences, yes, but protection, guidance, these are not debts. They are choices." The night deepened, and the silver light of the moon seemed to grow colder, sharper. Seraphine's thoughts drifted to the court she had left behind, to the whispers, the jealousy, the family that sought to control her. Here, in the forest, she was free from all that. But she also felt the weight of something else, something she could not yet name. A bond, strange and powerful, that tethered her to the Lycan king in a way that both terrified and thrilled her. A soft wind rustled the leaves, carrying with it a scent that was both foreign and intoxicating. Seraphine looked up at Kalen. Are you lonely?" she asked, unable to stop herself. He turned his gaze to the moon, the silver light reflecting in his eyes. "Loneliness is a companion I have known for centuries," he admitted quietly. "But meeting someone like you, it changes the rhythm of life. It reminds one that even in shadows, there is light." Seraphine felt a warmth in her chest she had never known. The thought that someone like Kalen, so powerful and ancient, could see her, understand her, care for her. It was almost too much to bear. Yet she knew in that moment that her life had shifted irreversibly. She was no longer just a girl caught in her family's cruel games. She was someone else now, someone who could step into danger, face the unknown, and survive. The night stretched on, and Kalen began to guide her back through the forest. He walked with silent confidence, every step measured, every movement precise. Seraphine followed, the cloak heavy on her shoulders but comforting, like a promise of protection. "Do not fear the world beyond this forest," Kalen said as they reached its edge, where the first light of dawn brushed against the horizon. There are battles to face, yes, but there is also a path forward. Together we will find it. Seraphine nodded, a sense of resolve settling in her heart. Together, she whispered, the word tasting like a vow. As the first rays of sunlight touched the forest floor, Seraphine realized that she had crossed a threshold. The girl who had walked into the grand hall hours ago, trembling and humiliated, had been replaced by someone stronger, someone braver, someone tethered to a destiny far larger than she had imagined. And yet, the howl of distant Lycan still lingered in her mind, a reminder that danger was never far. Tomorrow, the court would still be waiting. Tomorrow, her family would still plot. But tonight, she had survived. Tonight, she had begun to understand the strength that lay within her. And Kalen, the silver-eyed Lycan king, had shown her that shadows were not always to be feared. They could also protect, guide, and illuminate the path ahead. The sun rose over the kingdom of Urendor, spilling pale gold across the stone towers and cobbled streets. The city stirred with life. Merchants called out their wares, servants hurried along narrow corridors, and nobles adjusted their fine garments, preparing for another day of displays, whispers, and schemes. But for Lady Seraphine, the world felt different now. She carried a secret with her, a weight that was both terrifying and exhilarating, the knowledge of Kalen, the Lycan king, and the bond she had formed with him in the forest under the moonlight. As she stepped through the palace gates, the familiar walls that had once comforted her now seemed stifling, filled with the murmurs of judgment and envy. Her cousins, who had torn her gown during the ceremony of unity, had not forgotten, and she could feel their eyes following her as she moved through the grand hall. They whispered as she passed, their smiles sharp with malice. Seraphine's hand tightened around the folds of her dress, but she did not falter. The forest had taught her courage, and Kalen had shown her the strength of trust and presence. She would not be humiliated again. Not today. The morning session of the court began with the usual pomp. Nobles presenting their petitions, ministers reading letters, and the king himself presiding with careful dignity. Seraphine's cousins were present, as expected, their faces painted with false concern and veiled hostility. But she held her head high, her silver gown modest yet elegant, her posture conveying a quiet authority she had not known she possessed before the moonlit forest. And then a ripple passed through the court. The great doors at the far end of the hall swung open, and a hush fell over the room. All eyes turned toward the doorway, where a figure stood framed by the morning light. Cloaked in dark velvet, his presence was immediate, impossible to ignore. Silver eyes scanned the hall, commanding, sharp and full of quiet power. It was Kalen, the Lycan king, stepping into the human court for the first time. Gasps of shock and murmurs of fear spread like wildfire. Nobles whispered of the legends, of the immortal Lycan who ruled the forests beyond the mountains, a being both feared and respected. No one had seen him in the city for decades, and now here he was, walking with deliberate grace, heading straight toward Seraphine. Seraphine's heart pounded. She could feel the weight of the room, the tension rising like storm clouds. Yet amidst the fear and awe of the court, she felt a strange calm. Kalen was near, and the memory of the forest's silver light, the cloak around her shoulders, and his protective gaze gave her courage. "Seraphine," Kalen said, his voice low but carrying through the hall like a quiet command. "You have my protection here as well." Her cousins paled, their scheming smiles faltering. Whispers erupted again, some filled with fear, others with disbelief. He is here for her," one nobleman murmured. "Yes," Kalen replied, his gaze sweeping the room, "and I will not allow her to be harmed by petty jealousies or shallow ambitions." The court fell silent. The tension was palpable. Seraphine felt a mixture of pride and fear. She had never imagined that she could command such attention, such respect, even fear, from the nobles of Urendor. Yet, with Kalen by her side, she could feel the first sparks of empowerment stirring within her. The day passed in a blur of ceremonies and council meetings. Kaelin remained a shadow at her side, silent yet present, watching over her with unwavering vigilance. The courtiers tried to engage him, but he spoke only when necessary, his words sharp, precise, and commanding. His presence changed the balance of power in the room, shifting attention from whispered plots to the undeniable fact that Seraphine was no longer vulnerable. Yet, despite the protection, danger lingered. During a quiet moment in the afternoon, Seraphine overheard her cousins speaking in hushed tones, their voices tight with anger and frustration. "She will not last," one whispered. "He cannot stay here forever. Soon the court will turn against her." Seraphine clenched her fists, her mind racing. The forest had taught her courage, but the court was a different kind of battlefield. Here, words were weapons and appearances could wound as sharply as any blade. She had to be careful, cunning, and decisive. Kaelin sensed her unease. Later, as they walked through a private gallery lined with tapestries, he reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Do not fear them," he said softly. "Your strength is yours. My presence is only a shield, not the source of your power. You must learn to walk with courage even without me." Seraphine nodded, taking a deep breath. The memory of the moonlit forest and the silver reflection of the pool returned to her mind, grounding her. I will try," she said. "Good," Kaelin replied. "Because soon you will need to do more than try. Soon you will need to act." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the palace walls, a messenger arrived, bearing a sealed letter. Seraphine's hand trembled slightly as she broke the wax seal. Inside was a note written in a careful, elegant hand. "Your cousin plots against you. The magic of old has been called to bind your spirit. Beware the shadows, for they are not all mine to command." Her heart raced. She had known her family's jealousy, but this was something darker. This was a threat not just to her pride or her reputation, but to her very life. Kaelin's silver eyes narrowed as he read over her shoulder. "They have used forbidden arts," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is more than mere jealousy. They seek to control you through darkness." Seraphine felt a shiver of fear, but it was tempered by the resolve Kaelin inspired in her. She had survived humiliation, walked through danger in the forest, and faced her own fears. She would not be broken now. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm of anxiety within her. Kaelin's gaze hardened. "We confront it," he said. "But first, you must understand that your strength is more than mortal. Your courage, your will, they are weapons. The magic that binds you will test them. You must be ready." The evening descended into a tense preparation. Kaelin guided Seraphine through exercises meant to sharpen her mind, her instincts, and her awareness. They moved quietly through the palace halls, practicing ways to anticipate danger, to recognize deception, and to respond with precision. It was a dance of shadows and light, of trust and training, and through it, Seraphine felt herself growing stronger. By nightfall, the palace was quiet, but the tension remained. Seraphine could not sleep, her mind spinning with thoughts of her cousins, the forbidden magic, and the bond she shared with Kaelin. She walked to the balcony, gazing out over the city. The lights of Erendor twinkled below, distant and serene, masking the storms that brewed beneath. Kaelin joined her silently, the cloak he had brought with him draped over his shoulders. "Do you see?" he asked, gesturing to the city below. "The world appears calm, but danger is always present. You must learn to move within it without fear, without hesitation." Seraphine nodded. "I will," she said softly. "I want to be ready." His silver eyes softened, a rare warmth touching his expression. "And you will be," he promised. "Together we face what comes, and together we survive." A distant howl echoed from beyond the city walls, a reminder that the forest and its creatures were never far. Seraphine felt a shiver, but it was not of fear. It was anticipation, the thrill of facing the unknown, strengthened by Kaelin's presence and the courage she had discovered within herself. Suddenly, a shadow moved in the moonlight, fleeting but unmistakable. Seraphine's heart leapt. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Kalen's gaze sharpened. "Yes," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "The challenge is near. The darkness that seeks you is not idle. Tomorrow we confront it." Her pulse quickened. Tomorrow would bring danger, but it would also bring opportunity. Opportunity to face her family, to confront the forbidden magic, and to step fully into the power and courage she had begun to discover in the forest. As she stood beside Kalen, the city lights below and the stars above, Seraphine realized that her life had changed forever. The court was no longer a place of mere social games. It was a battlefield, and she was no longer a pawn. She was a player, armed with courage, guidance, and a bond that transcended the ordinary rules of the world. Kalen placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, a gesture both protective and affirming. "Rest tonight," he said softly. "Tomorrow we face them, and remember, fear is a choice. Courage is a choice, and together we will choose wisely." Seraphine nodded, the words sinking into her like seeds planted in fertile soil. The night was dark, but within it she felt a light growing, quiet, steady, and strong. The Lycan King had shown her that shadows could protect, and that courage could flourish even in the most dangerous of places. As the palace quieted and Seraphine finally allowed herself a moment of stillness, she understood that tomorrow would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. But she would not be alone. She had Kalen. She had the courage she had discovered in the forest. And most of all, she had the choice to step into the storm, unafraid, ready to face whatever darkness awaited. The moonlight glinted off the palace walls, silver and cold, yet full of promise. Tomorrow, the court would see a new Seraphine, a girl who had been humiliated and frightened, now transformed into someone stronger, braver, and more determined than ever. And in the shadows, Kalen watched her, his silver eyes gleaming with both pride and a quiet, unspoken anticipation. The sky over Urindor had turned a deep, blood-red as dusk fell, painting the city and the distant forest in shades of fire and shadow. The wind swept cold through the palace streets, carrying with it the whispers of danger. Seraphine stood on the balcony of her chambers, the cloak Kalen had draped around her shoulders still heavy and comforting. Her heart raced, for she knew tonight would be different. Tonight the challenge would come not from whispers or mockery, but from the darker forces her cousins had dared to summon. Kalen arrived silently, his presence a shadow beside her. Silver eyes scanned the horizon, alert to every movement, every flicker in the darkness. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with steel. Seraphine nodded. "I am. I've trained, I've prepared, and I trust you." He inclined his head slightly, a rare softness touching his expression. "Good. Trust will be your greatest weapon, and courage will be your shield." Together, they left the palace and moved toward the cliffs that marked the border between the human kingdom and the wild forests. The path was narrow, winding, and treacherous, but Kalen's footsteps were precise, unerring. Seraphine followed, the cloak wrapped tightly around her, feeling its warmth and strength as if it were part of her own resolve. As they reached the edge of the cliffs, the moon rose high, spilling silver across jagged rocks and dark waters below. The wind howled, carrying a scent that was foreign and sharp, tinged with the danger of ancient magic. Seraphine's breath caught, but she did not falter. Kalen's presence was steady, grounding, and she clung to it as tightly as the fabric of his cloak. From the shadows, figures emerged. Not wolves, not men entirely, but something in between, creatures bound by the dark magic her cousins had invoked. Their eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, and a low growl rumbled across the rocks. Kalen stepped in front of her, cloak spreading like wings, shielding her from view. "Do not fear," he said. "Focus on your heart. Focus on your courage." The creatures advanced, testing their limits, circling, probing. Seraphine could feel the energy in the air, the pull of the magic designed to bind her, to make her falter. But she steadied herself, recalling the lessons Kaelin had taught her in the forest. Courage is a choice, trust is a weapon, and strength lies in understanding oneself. One of the shadowy figures lunged. Kaelin's movement was instantaneous, a blur of silver and darkness, deflecting the threat without striking harm. Seraphine watched, her pulse pounding as his power revealed itself, controlled, precise, protective. "You can face this," Kaelin whispered, his voice brushing her ear. "You have the strength. Let it rise." Seraphine took a deep breath and closed her eyes, feeling the cloak around her shoulders, the steady presence of Kaelin beside her, and the courage within herself. She opened her eyes and stepped forward. The creatures recoiled slightly, sensing her resolve. "You will not control me," she said firmly, her voice carrying across the cliffs. "I am not your pawn, and I will not be bound by fear." The creatures faltered, and the dark energy that had been directed at her began to dissipate, weakening under the force of her will. Kaelin nodded, a flicker of pride in his silver eyes. "Good," he said. "Now together." Side by side they faced the creatures. Kaelin moved with strength and precision, guiding Seraphine, protecting her, and yet giving her space to act. Seraphine realized she was no longer the frightened girl who had arrived at the palace weeks ago. She was a force, capable of standing against danger, capable of shaping her own destiny. The battle was both silent and fierce. Shadows collided with silver light, the creature's growls echoing across the cliffs while Seraphine's voice, firm and unwavering, cut through the darkness. Each step she took, each declaration of will, weakened the magic her cousins had unleashed. And with Kaelin's guidance, they pushed the darkness back until at last the creatures dissolved into the night, leaving only silence and the moon's silver light. Seraphine sank to her knees, breathing heavily, her hands trembling. Kaelin knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said softly. "You faced the darkness and claimed your power. That is no small feat for a mortal." I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted, her voice catching with emotion. Kaelin shook his head, a faint smile touching his lips. "No, you could have. I only reminded you of what was already there." Seraphine looked at him, really looked at him, and in that moment she saw not only the power of the Lycan king but the depth of his heart. For centuries, he had carried loneliness and darkness, bound by rules older than kingdoms. Yet here he was, choosing to protect her, to trust her, to share this battle and the bond between them. They stood together as the wind swept across the cliffs, the moonlight washing over them in silver brilliance. Seraphine felt a transformation within herself, a sense of purpose, of courage, of resilience. She was no longer merely a girl caught in the cruel games of her family. She was a woman who had faced darkness and emerged stronger, braver, and wiser. Kaelin stepped closer, his gaze softening. "Seraphine," he said, his voice almost a whisper, "tonight you have done more than survive. You have claimed your place not just in the court but in the world, and in doing so you have changed me as well." Her heart skipped a beat. "Changed you?" she asked, surprised. "Yes," he said, his silver eyes meeting hers. "I have lived for centuries, alone, feared, and bound by shadows. But you remind me that there is light in the darkness, courage in fear, and connection even across worlds." A quiet stillness fell over them, the kind that comes only after a storm. Seraphine felt the warmth of his presence, the strength of his words, and the bond they had forged through trials, fear, and trust. And then, without a word, Kaelin draped his cloak over her shoulders once more, not as protection from shame or danger, but as a symbol of trust, unity, and the bond they now shared. Seraphine felt the weight of it differently this time, steady, comforting, and full of promise. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Then say nothing," he replied. "Let this moment speak for itself. Courage, trust, and love need no words." They remained on the cliffs, bathed in silver moonlight, the wind weaving around them like a gentle song. Seraphine realized that her life had changed irrevocably. She had been tested, she had been challenged, and she had survived. and in doing so she had discovered her own strength, her own courage, and her place in a world far larger than she had ever imagined. The dawn began to edge the horizon, turning the sky from crimson to gold. The creatures were gone, the shadows dissipated, and the first light of morning promised a new beginning. Seraphine and Kaelin stood together, looking out across the kingdom, a silence full of meaning between them. Kaelin finally spoke, his voice steady and certain. "The world is not without danger, Seraphine. You will face challenges, yes, but you are no longer alone. And neither am I. Together we can face whatever comes." Seraphine nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride, relief, and something she could not yet name but understood, a deep, unbreakable bond. "Together," she whispered, echoing the words she had spoken before in the forest, now full of certainty and resolve. The cloak around her shoulders shifted in the wind, heavy but warm. It had begun as a shield against humiliation and danger, but now it was a symbol, a promise of trust, protection, and partnership. For the first time, Seraphine looked at Kaelin not as a protector, or a king of shadows, or a figure of legend, but as someone who chose her as much as she chose him. The centuries of loneliness and pain he had carried were met with her courage, her will, and her unwavering resolve. Together, they were no longer bound by fear, only by choice, and in that choice they found strength. The wind carried a soft howl in the distance, a reminder that the forest, the world, and the dangers that lurked beyond the cliffs would always exist. But Seraphine no longer trembled. She had faced darkness and emerged stronger. She had faced the impossible and survived. And beside her, the Lycan king, silver-eyed and silent, offered not only protection but partnership, understanding, and something deeper than words could hold. As the sun rose over Urindor, golden light spilling across the city and the cliffs, Seraphine realized that she was no longer a girl in a torn gown, no longer a pawn in her family's games. She was a woman who had faced shadows, embraced her courage, and discovered love and trust that transcended fear. And Kaelin, the Lycan king, draped his cloak around her shoulders once more, not as a shield, but as a promise of unity, strength, and redemption. Together they stood at the edge of two worlds, beneath the silver and gold of moon and sun, ready to face whatever came next.